everybody. Happy holidays, and thanks for finding some time in this crazy busy time of year to attend our webinar today. I'm Cheryl Hart. I'm the Vice President of Coalition of Refuge Friends and Advocates, and I'd like to very quickly get us started on today's webinar. There'll be 3 speakers today. We'll start out with Libby Marking, who is the Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy for National Wildlife Refuge Association. She'll then pass it to Mark Buceas, who's retired COO of Refuge Association and also retired from Fish and Wildlife Service. And then Mark will pass it to Joan Patterson, who's the President of Coalition of Refuge Friends and Advocates. So we're excited to have you all here, and we think you'll be excited about what you're going to hear today. So Libby, it's all yours.
Great, thanks. I'll just share my screen quick. Hopefully. Okay. Okay. So I just wanted to go over just a few things really. So just some of the recent issues that we've been working on over the past few months or continue to have worked on. What's going on with the appropriations, especially now that we have the final package from Congress that just came out earlier this week. As well as the staffing challenges for the refuge system, because this is an issue we'll be focusing on very, very heavily in the coming year. And we want to make sure you guys are informed and can help out on that too. So let's start with recent issues. So we've been very active on lead issues on refuges. And very recently, the Wildlife Conservation Council, Hunting and Wildlife Conservation Council had a meeting, and as part of that, we sent a letter along with the American Bird Conservancy recommending that they recommend to the department that lead ammunition and fishing tackle be phased out on all lands managed under the system. And that's just a continuation of work we've been doing on lead. So I think the last time that we had a quarterly update webinar, we had just submitted public comments on phase out regulations that were for very specific refuges. So this is just a continuation of that work. We've also continued to be active on the Eisenbeck National Wildlife Refuge issues. For background, during the Trump administration, there was a land exchange agreement that authorized a road to be constructed basically through the heart of the refuge. So we have been involved in litigation on that. We were pushing for a rehearing to be held with a full Ninth Circuit court. So that happened just last week, which is great. However, we have just continued to request that Secretary Haaland rescind the land exchange agreement and put the issue to bed overall. So we continue to do that. On the Sevilleta National Wildlife Refuge, there is a transmission line that has been proposed through an existing easement through the refuge. However, we've been very concerned about the impacts that would have on wildlife as activities take place outside of the existing easement. So we've been pushing for the need for compatibility determination to take place. And we've been in very constant communication with the project managers about that request. Along with that, we sent a letter to Secretary Haaland regarding the Twin Pines mine proposal on Okefenokee, just requesting that she do everything she can to prevent the ecological damage that will inevitably result from open pit mining in the swamp. And lastly, with Hurricane Ian, we knew that there were significant damages to the refuge system as a result of that. So we have been, so we had advocated to appropriators to do supplemental disaster relief funding in the amount of $120 million, which is the number that we received from Fish and Wildlife Service on damages to the refuge system just from Hurricane Ian. And in addition to that, we know that they had also been hoping for 520 million in addition for nature-based solutions and resiliency projects for mitigation, so they can mitigate these damages for future natural disasters. So that's some of the recent work we've been doing over the last few months. And now into our favorite topic, appropriations. So as I mentioned, the FY23 Omnibus was just released earlier this week. This is expected to be the final package and passed before the end of the week. So we did see a plus up. As a reminder, in FY22, the enacted level was 519 million. And that's not too far off from the funding level that we had way back in FY 2010, which was our high watermark for the refuge system. And that was at 503 million. So really, we haven't grown very much since then. But the final bill in FY 23 includes 541 million, which is an increase of nearly 23 million. And that's a pretty good jump comparative to our previous years where it was like very minor increases. So in comparison, pretty big, but still nowhere close to where we actually need to be. If you've been paying attention to any of our work that we've been doing on FY23 appropriations, we had been requesting 712 million for FY23. But now, we've been in a lot of talks with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we've come up with a new number for FY24, and that is 1.5 billion at least in actual needs for refuge system operations and maintenance. So this is the number we'll be pushing for in FY24 now that we kind of have some additional information about the current needs. So how do we get to 1.5 billion? So the first thing we can look at is inflation. So the 503 million appropriated to the refuge system in FY 2010 is now today worth about 689 million. And as you can see, inflation has severely outpaced the very minor increases we have seen for the refuge system over the last decade plus. So this is, of course, very challenging, but as it relates to the staffing challenges that we see and that we'll talk about here in a sec, is for I'm forgetting figures now, but effectively, with any minor increase that we have seen, the inflation paired with fixed costs like the annual pay increases that happen across the board for federal employees, it just eats completely into any increase that the refuge system has seen. So effectively, even with these minor increases, the refuge system has been operating in has actually gotten a deficit of funding. So it's just not keeping up. The other thing to keep in mind is since FY 2010, 14 new refuge units have been added, including or as well as hundreds of millions of acres of marine national monuments. It's also grown by adding new services like the Urban Wildlife Conservation Program. And especially with COVID, visitation has increased by a lot, especially over the last years. So 67 million visitors per year went to the refuge system in FY22, and that's an increase of 34% since FY 2010. So these are also contributing factors to the need for such a large jump in increased funding. But the major reason is that there's just been a huge staffing loss over the course of the years due to these budget deficits. So since FY 2011, over 800 positions have been lost, and that's an enormous 25% loss in capacity. And I'm sure you've seen this on the ground, and Mark will talk about this some more, but these decreasing budgets has led to the de-staffing of refuges and consolidating refuges into complexes. And that has an impact on you and your ability to help and volunteer. So Mark will talk more about that. in ideal worlds, there would be roughly 375 staffed refuges within existing complexes with an average of 8 staff per refuge. And that's, biologists, that's specialists, that's law enforcement, et cetera. And when we look at the actual need per each of these sub-activities and understanding the average salary data for these positions, we can then estimate that the system needs an additional 560 million to hire staff to full capacity, and that's just for hiring. So from this chart, you can really see just how much, just how far behind the refuge system is in terms of full capacity staffing and how far we have to go. So that is, when you add up, the inflation number, the increased land base and programs, as well as the staffing needs, you get pretty dang close to 1.5 billion. So that what we're working towards. So as part of this focus that we're going to have on staffing, we're really hoping that friends organizations can be a huge part in this too, and getting this message out of here's what the staffing challenges have been on the refuge system and how it's impacting us. And here's what needs to happen to fix it. So, we'll be throughout the year inviting or asking you to write letters to the editor, have in-district meetings with your representatives, and we really encourage you to invite your members of Congress to the refuge and show them what's going on and what the impacts have been. For awareness, we'll be doing a letter writing campaign for the appropriations process, in which we'll be asking you to be a part of that. We'll also ask you to be a part of the sending in official appropriations requests, which is, we'll have toolkits just to make this process as easy as possible. So that will be in March and April. We're also going to plan to host a virtual Hill Advocacy Day. It's probably sometime in early summer. And this will, we'll organize it all. We'll work with you to make sure you have, to figure out the dates that are available and set up these meetings for you with your representatives to talk about these issues. So that'll be early summer. If this is something that you're interested in, we have a sign up sheet just so we can keep track of your interest levels to make sure we can get in touch with you and give you some more information. So Eden just posted the link for that sign up sheet in the chat. And of course, this might be something you have to go back to your boards and talk about, but I'd want to put this on your radar, and we'll be sure to be in touch with you about that as more plans get solidified for that. So that's what we're hoping for on staffing challenges, and I'll pass it over to Mark. Let me stop sharing my screen here to talk a little bit more about the staffing challenge issue in general.
Great. Thanks, Libby. Hi, everybody. I want to add my...
Mark, could I interrupt you for just a minute? I forgot to tell people, please put your names in the chat box. And also, if you have a question, if you'll type it in the chat box at the end of everyone's presentation, we'll go to questions. Thank you. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
No problem. No problem. I just wanted to add my thanks along with Cheryl for your participating in this webinar today, and more importantly, your support of your refuge and also the refuge system as a whole. I saw the value and importance of the Friends group when I was the refuge manager at the Arthur R. Marshall Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge years ago. And then when I moved on to the Washington office and was the division chief for visitor services and communications, I was actively involved with the Friends program nationally. So Friends make a huge difference, and we thank you for your support. I just want to build on a couple things that Libby mentioned, and that's, we're going to highlight mostly the staffing problem, but I do want to say, it's good news a little bit that we're getting an increase, or we're seeing hopefully the $22 million increase for the refuge system. But in reality, there are going to be a lot of refuges that may see a decrease in their funding. And so what happens is the system gets funding, but the refuge system also has to pay assessments for, support for IT, for helping to pay for building leases, you name it. There's lots of different funding cuts that take place. And then you take inflation into consideration, that there could be a refuge that doesn't have the funding that it even had last year, even though there's a $22 million increase. Obviously, that's a whole lot better than being flatlined and having no increase for the refuge system. A case in point, I think, is the good news for federal employees in that Congress authorized a cost of living increase. I think it's just under 5%. And that's great news, but unfortunately, Congress never authorizes the funding to go with it. So they expect every agency to pay for that cost of living increase internally. So we were on a call the other day and had word that in the Northeast region, in Region 5, that's going to be equivalent to about a $15 million cost to the region to cover that cost of living increase, which in effect means that they probably are not going to be able to do any filling any staff vacancies or do any staff hiring, because that's $15 million that they don't have available to do that. So sometimes we just have to be aware of all the different, what sounds good. We need to make sure we check on it. And it's great to have Libby and others that are monitoring that. So we mentioned that staffing is really important and it's crucial to the refuge system. I don't think I need to tell any of you that, how important the staff is at the refuge that you are friends at. Libby's presentation showed that there's been over 800 positions that have been lost since 2010, 2011. I think probably a lot of refuges where you're located have seen even more significant impacts than that. I talked to so many refuge managers that have half or less than half of the staff that they had back in 2010. Refuges that now are being complexed, as Libby mentioned, and you're being managed by a refuge that may be an hour or 2 hours away. And we're seeing significant impacts to the ability for the refuge to be, an outstanding place to visit. When you've lost your maintenance staff, you're not getting your trails maintained, don't have the biological capacity to make important decisions and defend the science behind the management that refuges do. You don't have the visitor services staff that's needed in order to help do the environmental education and interpretation. And probably for you as friends groups, you see that when there's no staff and the visitor center's closed, you can't operate your bookstore. And so you lose dollars as well. So there are significant impacts. And I personally am concerned that at the same time, we're trying to promote visitor use and get people to come to visit refuges. I want it to be a welcoming place where people can get out there and really connect with wildlife and not see places that are closed. So, but I think there's another issue too. And just besides these impacts that we're seeing now, I'm concerned about the long-term impacts of staffing loss. In particular, the continuity for staffing and for career development. It's great that there's money that is available at a refuge, and a lot of refuges have been able to hire American Conservation experienced students, ACE students, or they're able to hire interns. But unfortunately, they're only on board for a year or maybe a little bit longer, and then you lose them and you have to start all over again with additional staff. When you have vacancies and you're able to fill with permanent employees, you may get a new staff person in, but they've been working in under the refuge and they're gaining experience. And I'm real concerned about the long-term future of the refuge system. How are we developing our people to be the future leaders of national wildlife refuges in the refuge system? So I think that's one important reason why we really need to focus on the plight of staffing on refuges. I think there's a related factor too. I'm not sure how many of you talk with your refuge managers about it, but when the way most refuges operate, there are 8 regions in the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they each operate a little bit differently based upon the fact that the refuge system is so diverse. But in most cases, refuges receive funding based upon their staffing, and then they get what they're called management capability. So ideally, it's what they want to try to do is give funding for that refuge for the staff, what their salaries are, and then up to 25% in management capability. So when you lose a position, you lose that 25% that goes with it. You need that money, obviously, if you're going to hire somebody. Well, you need to be able to have funding for that person to be able to, pay for the gas for the vehicle they drive, for whatever tools and equipment they need, or software or training and things like that. So when you lose a position, you're losing that management capability at that refuge as well. And a lot of times it doesn't seem fair, but unfortunately, there are tough decisions that have to be made by the regional refuge chiefs and their staff. So they're not the bad guys. The problem is that they're not getting the funding they need. So in refuge parlance, they talk about it being base erosion. So the base funding that the refuge system gets continues to be cut back over all these years. And so we really want to focus on increasing the budgets, but we really want to have it to be where we're getting more staff and the funding that goes with it for that staff. So, and I'm going to turn it over to Joan, but this is where I think friends groups can play a pivotal role in supporting what the Refuge Association and what Corfa wants to do in focusing on staffing, because you can get your representatives out. You can be talking about how important your refuge is to your community, but also what's happening to it that's lessening its impact and value. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joan.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And folks, I had some slides and I've just decided to throw them away. So I'm going to talk and would love to hear your input. So one of the things in talking to both the refuge system and hearing from friends and Corfa's discussion, remember, we're just a small team of volunteers, just working to facilitate discussions and all, but we're just hearing, horror stories. Like from Mark Lyle, the horror story at Neil Smith, that they used to have 20 employees. And I guess by the end of the year, it is to be 4 employees. How can you do the work that you need to be doing if that's what's happened to staffing, So I just would like to talk to friends, have a discussion with you all about how your board, how your organization views advocacy. Talk a little bit about creating stories to, get your message out. And then the importance, and this is something we really believe in, that unless you have a relationship with your members of Congress, so much of this can't move forward. And that the importance of building those relationships and sharing your stories with them. But it first starts with a commitment by your organization to be involved in some sort of advocacy. Could I see a show of hands or input into the chat box to get a feel for, are your organizations committed to advocating for your refuge or hatchery? Would people just let me know? Because am I speaking to the choir, or do I need to do a little bit of advocating here for advocacy? Okay, I see a lot of hands, but I don't see all hands going up. So let me give you a brief rundown on it. We all support a federal entity, right? It's either a hatchery or it's a refuge. They're all dependent upon the federal budget. And our members of Congress, our representatives and senators, are the ones who set the priorities for whether or not there's funding going to the refuge system. They're the folks that make that decision. But we need to influence that decision. And I truly believe that if each one of our organizations wants to support our mission, we can only do that if we really advocate for funding for the refuge system and for hatcheries, okay? Because I know we have some hatchery groups here, so I want to make sure that they feel included. But you're all facing the same problem. Now, occasionally, folks will say, no, we as friends groups, as a nonprofit, we can't advocate. No. Congress says they want you to advocate. This is free speech. This is the First Amendment. You need to speak up for your mission. Any questions about that? You may occasionally get a refuge manager that says, no, you can't do that. No, educate them that this is what nonprofits are supposed to do. The only thing you can't do is lobby, which is requesting support for specific legislation. You're either saying, please, member of Congress, and you're talking to them or their staff. You're saying, please, increase the budget by $1 billion. Okay. You can't do that on a refuge. Take them outside the gate. Okay. Or get to their office and make that request, but don't do it on the refuge. But you really, really need, as an organization, to make that commitment to advocacy. Few things to think about. Who's going to be the leader of your group on this effort? Are you going to set up a committee? Are you going to have some policies around it? I'm going to, when Eden sends out the recording of this and everything, I'll supply you with the sheet that gives you a link to, like, the Friends of Sherburne, Sue Hicks. They did their board manual on page, 29. They have their advocacy policy. It just really helps to provide your group with some guidance on where you as a group has decided to go. Okay, so Cheryl, Sue, any questions that I need to answer right now, or should I keep going?
I think it's mostly comments that we're getting right now. I don't see questions pertinent to what you're talking about right now.
All right.
There were a couple questions about, is advocacy, are we sure that this is going to result in something? Like, is this the right move we need? Like, basically, is this worth the effort? I think is the question. So if Joan, you want to start.
Oh gosh, this is hard work, folks. This is a marathon. And it's starting a marathon when you're later in life. So it's really a tough effort here, okay? We're going to, hopefully if we all work together, deliver the same message about the funding needs, but make that message local, hopefully we'll get some improvement here. But it's something that we constantly need to be doing. We constantly need to be building those relationships, because if we don't, we're just not going to go anywhere, But this is tough. Don't expect results overnight. If you're pushing for something like, say, On Your Refuge, sometimes it will take 5, 6, 7 years. Think of the fight that we've had over the Arctic. Man, that's been going on for decades. But certain improvements that you want to see on your refuge or things, it's going to take time. It is just going to take time. I can't tell you it's going to happen overnight. That would be it.
I'll add to that. So as the, lobbyist for the Refuge Association, I have a lot of conversations with people, and will be in the new Congress, especially about all these issues. And I'll tell you that most of these staff that I talk to don't know almost anything about the refuge system. A lot of them don't even know what refuges they have in their state or their district, and it's the first time they're hearing about it. So, I'm obviously there to educate about the refuge system, what it is, and all these needs, but I can't always speak to what's happening on the ground, or these specific anecdotes or stories. And that's always the question I get asked as soon as I'm done telling them about, here's the funding challenges, here's what the refuge system is. And they're like, okay, I hear you. Can you tell me, like, what's actually happening on my refuge in my state or my district? And I don't know, because I haven't been there, and I don't have, a massive spreadsheet telling me what's happening on these refuges. So that's where your voice is so important. And if we're not utilizing our voices to be at the table, and actually move the needle and change minds and educate, nothing happens, and we continue to suffer, and those sufferings get passed on to you as friends organizations. So, it has to be a collective effort. And these local specific stories and anecdotes and data and these relationships you build are the actual power behind the movement we're trying to do. I'm one person. People in DC don't really care what, like, some DC lobbyist has to say, but they really, really care about what their constituents have to say, because that's who they answer to, and that's who they can, like, actually be in touch with. So that's my pitch on advocacy and why it's so important for you to be involved.
back up what Libby says too, is that like yesterday I was listening to a webinar and they had a quote from a woman who's been the legislative director for one of the representatives here in Virginia. And she said, every time she talks to somebody, what she wants to know is what that piece of legislation, what's the impact it has on them? What's the impact it has on the groups that it serve, that you serve? So they want to know, you know, what these lousy budgets have meant to you, what they have meant to the kids who come out to your refuge, what they mean to your local community. That's what they want to know, in addition to what the national needs are, but it's your local needs. You are the constituent. They want to hear from you. So be thinking about, as we're moving forward on this, we really need for you to be thinking about how have the budget shortfalls, how have the staffing reductions impacted you, your friends group, your community, the groups that you serve. It is important at this point, go talk to the service people. Don't send an email. Don't necessarily have talk to them. Just talk to them about what's going on, the challenges that they're facing, and then try to figure out the challenges that Refuge staff is facing. How does that get down to your level? So,
Joan,
yes.
We may not have research data to back it up, but we do have anecdotal information that when Friends started making Hill visits, whenever that was, back in the prehistoric days, the budget for Fish and Wildlife went up dramatically. So yeah. We don't know, we can't prove it's not that it's cause and effect, but for some strange reason, when Friends started contacting their representatives and senators and telling them how important refuge funding was to them, refuge funding improved.
It sure did. And for example, all right, I'll tell you a story. Back in 2010, okay, that's the high point for refuge system funding. That year, 5 Friends groups went in and testified to the House Appropriations Committee about the need for the refuge system. Norm Dix from Washington State was in charge of the Appropriations Committee at that time. When the 5th group got up and said the exact same number, he turned to his aide and said, make it so. So friends, when we unite, singing the same tune, but talk about our individual needs, it does make a difference. Of course, it also helps if you have an appropriator that really likes refuges, okay? So that's part of, Nisqually had a great relationship with Norm Dix. That helps. One of the things that Corfa and NWA is going to be doing on January 18th, we're going to be doing a webinar that day about storytelling, and that ties into advocacy, but also fundraising and membership and everything else that we do. Just how do we create the stories that engage and have an impact on folks? So what I mentioned earlier, this is all about building relationships. What we know from research from other organizations is if you have a relationship with your member of Congress, they will more likely to listen to your story. They're going about and they're on the fence about some specific legislation like refuge system funding. They're on the fence about it. If they have heard from someone that they trust, they're more likely to vote the way that person ask them to go. In terms of like letter writing, if they get 10 letters from people that they trust explaining to them their situation, what's going on the ground there, they're more likely to vote in favor of what those 10 people are proposing. Your voice is very powerful, but it's powerful if you have a trusting relationship with them. So, guys, in the fact sheets that I'll send out, there's a link to show how you can find out exactly who your representatives are, who your senators are. Hey, if you're not sure that your representative is covering the local refuge, put in that address of the refuge and find out who the representative is for that area. We got to tackle a lot of different folks on the Hill to make this all work. If possible, do you know somebody who already has a relationship with your local congressperson, your senators? Do you know somebody? Now, the other day said, no, someone said to me, no, we don't have anybody in our group that has that sort of influence. Think hard. I bet you do. I got to tell you the story of, there was a friends group, well, the Friends of Southeast Louisiana. Some of their members came up to Washington, D.C. This fellow, Bill Jules, who's just he was an absolutely wonderful person. He had a meeting with Senator Mary Landrieu, and Bill's wife, Judy, came with him. Well, it just so happens that Mary Landrieu and Judy went to the same college, Louisiana State University. Their mascot is the tiger, and the two of them, the senator and Judy, are doing the tiger yell during the meeting. Both Bill and Judy were invited to Mary Landrieu's house after that meeting. Talk about building a relationship, okay? You're looking for those things. Did somebody room with that senator during college? Did you go to the same college? You're just looking for some sort of connection there. Because if you can find that connection, you can find a way of saying, gee, I know something about you, and they're just going to listen to you. What you also want to do is, so how do you find that? Get on their newsletters, sign up for their newsletters, go to their website, sign up for their newsletters, look at social media, get to know their legislative records. Now, some of these folks may be fairly new, and they may not have much of a federal government legislative record, but look in other places. If they're brand new to Congress, look at your major newspapers and see if there's a profile of that new member of Congress. That will help to tell you what they're really interested in, and that's what you want to find out. The other thing you want to find out is who's their staffers, because it's their staffers who you really, really want to get to know. A member of Congress you might get 5 minutes with, but if you can get a hold of their staffers, you want to get to that point where the staffer is calling you and saying, what do you need? They're the folks that you really want to build the relationship with. Ideally, it's the folks in the district office, folks close to home. You do also want the Washington, D.C. office, but it's the district office that's going to spend a little bit more time with their constituents. And they're the ones that are hired first. So if it's a new member of Congress, they're going through that process of hiring the district people. Then they'll go through the process of hiring the folks for the Washington office. Things that you can do to help foster this relationship: offer them something. Number one thing I would suggest, get them out to your site. That's where they really make the connection. They want to see what's going on. They want to know why this is important to constituents. So invite partners on that day that someone's going to be there. Invite your member of Congress to speak. I know the Friends of Ridgefield just had their member of Congress who just unfortunately got elected out of office, but she came and spoke. And thanks for getting a building up on that refuge. Also give them an opportunity to have photographs of them posted on social media and all that sort of stuff. You need to educate your members of Congress about what's going on. So if they're new members, as Libby, you might need to educate them about the hatchery system, the refuge system, the whole kit and caboodle. And then you also want to educate them about a few issues, refuge system funding, but also an issue about what's going on at your local refuge. Bring it down to the local level. So let's see, what else? Just make them aware of how important your place is. In terms of communicating with them, try to make sure you communicate with them at least on a quarterly basis, because you've got to build that relationship. It is just so important. So that's it for me, folks. I've spoken long enough. Questions?
Thank you, Joan. I'm going to start at the top, and this one came in early from Bergie. Even though there is an increase in funding to the refuges, don't they require that increase to be used for pay increases for existing staff, which basically gives them no additional funding for hiring new? Mark, you want to take that one?
Well, that's basically the case. I mean, they're going to have to pay for the positions that they that they currently have on board, and then, as I mentioned, they're going to have to pay for any of the cost of living increases and any increases in the federal government's commitment for insurance and things like that. And those are staggering costs. So when you take that into consideration, there's a lot less money that's available. So it's going to impact, and that's why you hear, if you talk to enough refuges, and maybe if you talk to other friends groups, refuges now that have vacancies, it could be months before they even get word that their position might be possibly filled, and somebody up in the regional office is having to make tough decisions as to which refuge gets their vacancy filled. So, but you're right, Bergie. The money goes to just pay for the operational costs of the staff they've got, and if there's money left over, then they try to decide how to best spend it.
Thank you, Mark. Question from Jonathan. What makes us think anything will change with increased advocacy? We already talked a little bit about that, but maybe some of you have something to add.
I did want to add on to that, so as a comparison point, the National Park Service has also been experiencing a lot of staffing challenges, and it's there's been a really great movement to address that. It's been over the course of several years, but it's really become an issue in the minds of the public, and it de facto in the minds of Congress. And as a result of all of that advocacy that happened around staffing for the National Park Service and those needs, in the Inflation Reduction Act that passed Congress earlier this year, the National Park Service received $500 million just to hire staff. So we know this money is able to be appropriated. We know that there's funds available to make this happen. We just need to educate that the refuge system suffers from the exact same challenges. So just to give a comparison point about why it's so important to really talk about these issues and make them known and very public, so that's groundswell of support comes, and in a few years maybe we'll get 500 million too.
Thanks, Libby. Another question, is the Refuge Caucus still functioning? Libby, that's probably for you.
Yeah. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that, I'm still in touch with the Refuge Caucus chairs, but no, in the sense that the caucus isn't super active. They did co-host a Hill briefing with us earlier this year with, leaders from the Fish and Wildlife Service about the refuge system. So in that sense, yes, but no, in the sense that they're not really active. There isn't, active communication between members of the Congress about, okay, what can we do? What can we do next? So this is my goal in the coming Congress to, one, revive that and get them all talking to each other, and two, bringing new members into the caucus as well, because we did lose some after this Congress ended, or is about to end. So, that's going to be part of my work too, and we plan to be in very close contact with them and keeping them up to date and having them advocate on our behalf as well.
Thanks, Libby. This question comes from Mark. I have been in contact via email and phone with Reed Willis, aide to Senator Grassley in Iowa. We discussed the budget, especially focusing on headcount. His response, both via email and phone, was for friends groups to go out and solicit grants. I have been involved with many grants over the years for equipment and/or special projects, but not full-time employees. He did not seem to recognize the fact that most, if not all, groups will provide grants for a full-time. Most, if not all, groups will not provide grants for a full-time federal employee. My suggestion to NWRA is to work on educating staff personnel of both our senators and representatives.
I think that's a good point. There's clearly needs to be work at upper levels, and the Refuge Association can certainly help educate. I do think, following up on what Joan said, a lot of these congressional folks, and especially their district staff, have never been to your refuge, and they know nothing about it. And really most congressmen don't like to lose funding for their districts. So, but if they're not aware that refuges are being cut and there's no staffing there, we need to inform them on that. I think if we can get them out there and excited about that refuge that's in their district, and then realize, all these different Friends members, how much they value the refuge, it makes a difference for them, and so on. I think that that's the kind of stuff that's going to take some time to do, but I think it's critical, because just hearing from somebody at the Fish and Wildlife Service level in general, they talk in such big numbers that they don't comprehend that even a couple $100,000 cut can be huge to a refuge, but they need to understand that. And the best way to do it is get them out to the refuge. If it means you get your district rep out there first and get them excited, and they encourage their congressman to come. When I was the manager at Loxahatchee, we did a congressional staff day. We had several congressional districts within the refuge boundary, and but one of the staff persons had never been out before, and we worked in partnership with our Friends group, but she was so excited that she went back, and that's all she could talk about to her congressman. Well, for him, he would once a year bring his entire Washington, D.C. staff down for a week to the district. And that following year, they asked if they could spend the day, just his entire congressional staff, district staff, on the refuge. So we would never have gotten to the congressman by himself. We got through that through the district staff person.
Thanks, Mark.
And Cheryl, can I follow up question to Mark? And there's also, aren't there limitations, like Friends can't, the service has to live within their budget. So it's not as if Friends can hire staff for the service. Is that correct?
That's true. I mean, there's this, legislation called the Anti-Deficiency Act and things like that prevent those kind of things from happening. But that's something where the Friends group has to work with the service. What would happen normally is that the Friends group would hire a position and they would pay for that position to do work, which supports the refuge, but they're not going to hire a position that is considered a federal employee or a federal position. So there are ways to kind of work around that, but if you want to call it a workaround, but yeah, there's specific prohibitions that are in place.
Hey, Mark, this is Wilder. I have a question following up on your example. Can you tell us how the Friends contributed to that process that you described for Loxahatchee?
Yeah, for the Friends group, what they did is and I think, I don't know if there's now prohibitions on that, but when we did this was back in 2004, 2005. We invited congressional staff out, and they had the chance that morning to get out and do whatever they wanted to. We offered canoe trips, we offered hiking, wildlife observation, some birding, things like that. And then we came back and basically we had a meal with the staff, the Friends group, and the congressional members. And the Friends group helped pay for the food. But then there was an opportunity for them, even if you can't do that, I would encourage that there would be an opportunity for the staff and the Friends group to have just a social time with the staff or the congressman, to have a chance to talk about what the Friends group does, and they can talk about what the refuge means to them. And as Joan said, you can't use the refuge as a place to make a pitch for more funding, but certainly take them off the refuge. I know of a refuge in Kentucky where the Friends group works with the manager, and they do a site visit for a lot of the local district judges and county commissioners and things like that. But when they're done, the Friends group takes them to lunch off refuge and then talks about funding and staffing needs and things like that, but they do it off site.
Carol makes a statement. A relatively simple thing I could do is write a short summary of what the refuge has done in the past month, or the particular challenges the refuge has had, and send it as an FYI to our U.S. representatives and senators each month. Do you think that's a good technique for stimulating their support of increased funding when the requests come up? Our political representatives are already aware of our urban refuge, but the goal would be to make the refuge a higher priority.
It's a great way of doing it. Keep in front of them, you know, even call them afterwards and say, hey, did you see what we did this month? Did you see what's going on? That's great, Carol, do it.
Plus, I think that I think if you can earn, you know, your congressional representatives, your district staff, some trust from them, if you can be proactive in letting them know that. So again, when we tried to do some things at Loxahatchee, like our CCP, we invited the district staff out to get a briefing from us as to what was going to happen and what might be some of the controversial points and what our responses would be. And they really appreciated the fact that they had a heads up, because they just get blindsided by complaints from their constituents. So, you know, in the good old days when you had refuge staff, that should be their job. But where you have refuges with very little staff, if the Friends group can do that, that would be very helpful. So I think that's a great idea, to be proactive.
And sometimes too, guys, you know, it's one thing for Fish and Wildlife Service personnel to talk about these things. Some of the staff members from members of Congress are going to turn like, well, you're paid to do this, you know? You're not. You're the constituents. You're the voters. You're the local residents. So you have more of an impact on when you deliver these messages.
Another question from Bergie. Are there plans to begin in-person advocacy on the Hill? Virtual works, but it's not ideal. And I know you already answered, Libby, but I'm not sure everybody's reading the chat.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so things are still a little weird on the Hill right now. You can go in person, but I mean, it's a situation where a lot of congressional staff just don't go to the office at all. You have to go through and go to a check-in desk. Like, it's a lot different process now than it used to be. So logistically, it's just kind of hard, especially also because on our end, as the folks who will organize it, that's a lot more logistically challenging. So for now, we're planning to do virtual because we know we can get a lot more reach and a lot more participation that way. But when the Hill goes back to normal, hopefully, you know, in the next few years, we'd love to do in-person fly-ins again. Yeah, but ideally both throughout the year. Yeah.
And some of the folks that we're hearing from are also saying district visits are in some ways more powerful than going to DC. DC still works, but as Libby explains, it's a far more cumbersome process. And it seems like members of Congress, they don't really care where they meet, whether it's district or up on the Hill or virtually, just meet with them, you know. But one of the things I'm hearing, the district visits are a whole lot easier.
Okay, another comment. How do you approach the issue? Well, we gave you money. It's the Fish and Wildlife staff that allocates the budget for individual refuges.
Well, have they given us money? I
They
think
gave us some, but not enough.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as I said, like any of these minor increases you see are totally eaten up by inflation. And I mean, most of the time, those haven't even covered the cost of like the scheduled wage increases, and they have to cut staff anyway across the board. So, you know, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that, but yeah, it's not like they're have a lot of choices about where they're spending their money with the current situation.
Okay, a question from Richard. Do refuge personnel attend your board meetings to a report on refuge and issues? Our complex manager does attend our Friends board meeting. So I guess that's a question for Friends groups. Are your refuge liaison and your refuge managers attending your meetings so that you know what problems they're dealing with? I'm still getting down here. Question from Barb: will you post these forms on the coalition Facebook page? We're planning to do that, Barb. Planning to get it out in any way we can. So website, Facebook page, any way that we can get the information out to friends. So please feel free to share it. If you didn't notice the fact sheet that was attached to the reminder, the invitation this morning, I think Eden posted the link again, or Eden or Libby posted the link again in the chat. Is there a way to give that option to the refuge managers on how to use the money? Some would rather have no pay raises and hire people to help. I see Mark shaking his head no.
I don't see where a refuge manager would be able to say, I don't want to see a pay increase. I mean, those things are dictated by Congress in terms of the cost of living increases and things like that. So I don't think they'd have the option at the field level.
Okay, Mary says, can we get a copy of the deck sent to us, please? Yes, you will get the deck and also the worksheets that Joan mentioned, and the fact sheet, and a whole lot of materials, and a link to the recording of the webinar. And that information is also posted on the Corfo Resource Center, Corfo website Resource Center. With earmarks, this is from William. With earmarks now approved, advocacy efforts will lead to earmarks for specific refuges, but not all refuges. Those with congressional support will have an unfair advantage. Should we all advocate for our own refuge, knowing it may shortchange other refuges? How do we deal with this issue of earmarking?
Yeah, really great question. And I'll say, from the National Wildlife Refuge Association perspective, we want, our friends organizations to ask for funding, not just for your refuge, but, for the whole system, because it benefits everybody. And then you're not having to fight for, just your refuge every year, because earmarks are one-time deals, right? So, I'm not saying don't advocate for your own refuge for earmarks, but I'm not saying that it's not something you can do, right? So it's up to you. But in terms of national priority, this is what we're looking at. Yeah.
And if an earmark can help a national priority, that's pretty good.
Lisa asked, thanks, Mark, for the reminder that acts and appropriations are passed separately. I noticed a news report yesterday that RAWA failed to pass despite a huge number of co-sponsors. Would like to hear opinions on whether this is likely to have a negative impact on the staffing and capacity building within the refuge system.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. That's the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and that's a huge package or a huge bill that many folks in the environmental community have been pushing for a long time. Unfortunately, I don't really know a whole lot of details about what is in there or isn't in there for the refuge system. It's not something I've been following like incredibly closely, just because we're so ingrained in the appropriations process. But so I really don't have any details to share about it. I'm sorry.
Okay, I am scrolling again. The National Park System was mentioned in terms of funding increases, but the Park Service had tremendous publicity and national media presence over the last several years. Are there any plans or hope that we can get some national media coverage of the system? It would help enormously to have this. Marketing?
Yeah, I might even let Eden chime in here a little bit too if she wants, but this is something we've been talking about a lot internally, me and Eden together specifically, but also within our coalition, the Cooperative Alliance of Refuge Enhancement. This is a coalition of 24 national orgs that all work together towards refuge system funding. So there are definitely plans in place for this coming year to really ramp up the national media presence, marketing presence, to do all of that stuff, because we know that's such an important part of moving the needle on anything Congress cares about, is you have to make these kind of national public campaigns. So it's definitely in the plans. The specifics we're not sure, exactly what we're doing, we're not sure. It depends on capacity, things like that. But from an organization front and a coalition front, that is something we're looking at.
And I don't know how many of you might have seen it, but the CNN's, I don't know whether it's a blog or a website or whatever, anyway, their travel site published an article just yesterday about all the other public lands besides national parks and how wonderful they are. I just put a link in the chat to that article if you're interested in reading it. They talk about specific refuges, but also about other public lands besides national parks and how they also provide such a wonderful respite for people who need to get out in nature. We're at the end of our time. We want to honor your time and we appreciate your being here. Do any of the presenters have any final closing comments?
Just a quick comment from Corfa. I want to first of all thank everybody who's participated in everything this year, the webinars, letters, articles for the link, and just the support that you give each other in the Facebook group. Just we will be having a webinar on the 18th about storytelling. And then after that, we're going to have a series of sharing sessions so people can talk about the issues that they see on their refuges and hatcheries and find out exactly what you all need, what we need to work together on in order to have the materials needed to make a strong case to our members of Congress. Okay, so be watching for those dates that will be sent out after the first of the year. Okay, but thank you everybody for what you're doing.
Eden, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Carol Armstrong had asked, she had said there's 568 national wildlife refuges, but did we know the number of Refuge Friends groups that are out there? And I think Joan probably can answer this question.
It's about 180. We're looking for a new list from Fish and Wildlife Service on this, but we think it's around 184 refuges. Okay.
Okay, again, our time is up and we appreciate everybody attending. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you at the next webinar on storytelling. And we are looking forward to your support for better funding for the refuge system and the refuge staff. Happy holidays to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Happy holidays.